Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Whether you're a current subscriber or brand new to my channel, welcome and I'm happy that you're here. So today's video is a wind-up video for the dining / living room of the Homestead house. So I have a few pieces that I'll show you that I didn't do tutorials for one reason or another, as well as some of the items from my collection that will go into this room just to finish it all off. There are 3 items that I made using tutorials from other people's channels because I love to do that as well. So instead of the normal cutting instructions that you would find in the description box below, I will leave links to those YouTube tutorials just in case you want to have a closer look. Let's get to it. So I have lots to show you, but I'm going to start with some of the pieces that you've already seen me build in tutorials and what I've done with them since then. So this is the dresser unit that we made, and my grandmother always loved doilies. There was doilies on every piece of furniture, with probably the exception of the furniture that belonged specifically to my uncle. And so I found this lace that I think works fairly well as a doily. Obviously real doilies are way too thick, so I had to improvise there. But I've also added some family photos. Now these are actual photos of my family that I have just reduced down so that they are 8 by 10 in miniature size photographs and put a frame around them. This lovely little lady in the upper corner of this one is my grandma, and I think she was 17 at the time. So those are all of her siblings. The next piece is the sofa bed, and this was a recent tutorial. So I just made some bedding to go onto the bed, and as I said in that video, this will stay a bed in the house. I'm not going to make it up into a couch because this is where my uncle slept, and so I want to keep it as a bed. For this fabric, I just found an old flannel shirt at the thrift store, and it was very soft and worn, and so I just cut it up to make the bedding. One of the other pieces that we made in the tutorials was this little retro TV stand. And I know I mentioned that I had this little TV, so I've put my doily on top, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to attach the TV now to the TV stand. Now normally I use museum wax or tacky wax to apply furniture so that I can move them around if I want to, but in this case I can't think of any place else that I would put a TV other than on the TV stand. So for this particular piece I'm going to glue it down. Now here's some pieces that I made that I didn't do a tutorial for. I made this little dresser for Uncle Alec's side of the room. I didn't do a tutorial because it's very similar to the other dressers that I made. All of the drawers do open in this dresser. And so that would have sat at the end of his bed and would have held basically all of his worldly possessions, which weren't a lot, to be honest. But I'm going to put on top of that this little Coleman lantern. Now, I did not make this lantern. I bought this from AliExpress, where I buy a lot of my miniatures from. I imagined back in the 30s, 40s, they would have used coal lanterns for light. In fact, there is one in the museum in their hometown that belonged to them. So I know that they used them, but I still thought it made a nice decorative piece for the era that the house was, and probably still sat in the house somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and attach that just to the top of the dresser on the corner. As you can see, there's no doily on this dresser because I don't think my uncle was near as enthralled with doilies as my grandma was. So one of the other pieces that I made off camera is just this very basic side table. And I'm going to put both of these in the living room. I'm going to put one aside for now. We'll talk about that one in a second. But this one would have sat beside my uncle's bed. So a little bit of a nightstand, I guess, if you will, but also a place for him to keep some of his toiletries. Because remember, there was no bathroom in the house. So I took one of the little cups that I had in my collection, just a little coffee cup, and I have made two small little toiletry items. So the first one is this little shaving brush. So all this is just a little piece of rubber tubing that you would use for wiring, which is of course hollow. And then I took a paintbrush, which kind of came down to a point, and I filled it with glue, stuck the end of the paintbrush into the tubing, and once it was dry, cut off the rest of the brush. So that will sit inside the little cup on the table. And then I also made him a little razor, and this is basically made out of toothpicks and maybe a little bit of scrap wood that I've just kind of shaved and shaped to look like the head of a razor. So I've added just a little bit of tacky wax to the bottom of the cup, and we'll place that onto the table. And I think actually I'm going to just attach the razor to the table as well. I've also mounted a small mirror where this table will go so he can see when he shaves in the morning. Now the second little table is actually going to be a place where the telephone will sit. And this would have sat probably in the dining room, but very close to the kitchen doorway, so that it would have easy access if the phone rang. Obviously there was no phone back when the house was first built, but by the time I came along, there was definitely a phone in the house. So first things first, we have to add the doily. I'm just using some Mod Podge. And I'll just take my doily and then I'm going to add another layer of Podge over top. And while that's drying, we'll have a look at the phone. So I got this little phone from AliExpress. It's super cute. It's very typical of the 60s. But the wire that the handle is on, or the receiver is on, is too stiff for that to actually sit in the cradle. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that handle into the cradle before we attach it to the table. I'm just using this little dimensional glue. I find it works really, really well on plastic and metal. And this I think is cast out of metal. It's heavy enough that I think it's metal. So we'll just go ahead and put that receiver in. And we'll hold it in place until that glue sets. To attach the phone to the table, I'm just going to be using some tacky wax. There was in the living room, of course, a sewing machine, and the original sewing machine is in the museum as well. And I was prepared to actually try and recreate that sewing machine, but then I found one on AliExpress, which was so similar that I opted to just buy the sewing machine instead of trying to make something that was really already made. So I have the little sewing machine here. It does have the little pedal, which is what the one on the farm had. And it came with this little piece of fabric, which I've cut down a little bit because I felt like there was just too much of it there for this space. And so I'm going to glue that in as if she was sewing it. Unfortunately, there is no space at the bottom where the foot of the sewing machine would be, because I really would have loved to have slid that underneath, but that's okay. I'm going to glue it on there. It also came with this little pair of scissors, which are super cute, and that's going to sit here. And then I also felt like she needed a sewing kit. And so I made her this little sewing box. Now I didn't show this in a tutorial because it's not my design and it's not my idea. I actually built this using someone else's YouTube. And so if you're interested in making this little sewing box, you can find it at Joanna K's Mini Makes is the name of her channel. And she does a great job of showing you how to make this little box. So you can certainly pop over there if you're interested. Now what I did do was I did create some items inside of the box, which were not part of that tutorial. So I just found some fabric that I had on hand and that I cut small strips and folded up. I made some little buttons out of cardstock and then just poked little holes in for the buttonholes. There's about a dozen of them in there. And I also, and they're glued in there unfortunately, so you may not be able to see them, but I also made some little bolts of thread as well. And so that will sit probably below and beside the sewing machine. This is another little piece that I made. It's a little radio. And again, I didn't do a tutorial on this because it's not my design. If you want to pop over to watch Ara from Bentley House Minis, this is her design. Now she does sell a kit that she sells in her store, which provides all of the materials to make this little radio. At one point, she also shared a free pattern for this radio, and at that time, that was about a year ago, I took full advantage and I copied the pattern that she offered for free, and that's what I used to replicate. I don't know if she still offers that pattern. I tried to have a look to see if I could find it. I couldn't. That doesn't necessarily mean she doesn't. Maybe it's just that I couldn't find it, but I will post the link below for how to make this or where to get the pattern from if you so choose. And this little guy is just going to sit up on top of the piano bed. Next we have Grandma's rocking chair. I did not make this chair. I ordered it from AliExpress. I did paint it, however, because it was this bright red, which wasn't the right color for the house, but it's very similar to what Grandma had. And so what I did make was just this little cushion to set in the back, just to make it a little bit more comfortable for her when she sat in the rocking chair. For the wall space, I've just printed out a few more pictures. So this is actually my Grandma and Grandpa's wedding picture. And so that will go on the wall, as well as this picture of my grandmother and her siblings. And then, of course, no room is complete at my grandma's house without a picture of Queen Elizabeth, because she was her biggest fan. And then we also have this picture of my great-grandparents, who are my grandmother's parents. And so those will go up on the wall to fill up some of that wall space. And last but not least, I wanted to show you the fiddle that I made. Now, I did not do a tutorial for this because, again, I used someone else's work. This is their design and their tutorial, so I'll put a link for A Square to Spare below, and you can watch Kat make that fiddle if that's something that you're interested in as well. But I felt like it was necessary. We do have my grandpa's fiddle still in the family, and that was his instrument of choice, and that was kept at the house for many years after he passed away. And so I felt like it needed to be on display as well as the banjo. I hope you've enjoyed this part of the project. I've really enjoyed putting it together. There are so many memories wrapped up in the furniture in this room. Over the next few weeks, we'll be moving into the last room of the house, which is the porch area. Now, there's not a lot in there as far as furniture goes. I will be making a workbench, probably a gun rack, and I'm also going to take a crack at making a cream separator because there was one of those in the porch as well. It should be interesting. I do have a picture to reference, but I'll be just winging it for that one. But I'm excited to get started on that room. There's lots of fun things that I'm going to add to it after the furniture is built, and so I hope you'll join me for that final room. Until the next time, take care of yourself, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.